what exactly you're doing with Russian that, right?
Yeah.
Something with Russian?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's what am I doing with the Russian? Um, so my dissertation, the working title at the moment is How Singing in Russian Catalyzes Low Male Voice Coordination. And where that comes from is I'm looking at if we can use Russian vocal repertoire to help low male voices get coordinated. But you can't say get better faster, like they don't understand those subjective terms in academia. So you kind of find ways to objectively prove some skills acquisition, or like I said, the word coordination might sound a bit fishy to a normal person, but in this sense, it's one of the metrics that I'm using to show that low male voices who engage in the act of learning and performing Russian vocal repertoire make beneficial vocal discoveries. And part of that, and correct me if I'm going on too much about it, please interrupt. But why Russian? Why did I pick that out of a hat? And it arose from, I guess let's use a scholarly word, heuristically. My experience of singing in Russian was that it was a really good fit. Like it's just the language seemed to sit well, and I wondered why that was. I've wondered for a long time, and anecdotally, I hear from colleagues a lot that Russian has a sit. And so, in my doctoral work, as I started to investigate that, I looked into linguistics to try and that seems like the no-brainer. Go to linguistics. What is it about that? And there's a couple of phenomena. So as singers, we use the phonemes of language, which are our vowels and our consonants, right? And truthfully, if we look at a phonemic inventory of Russian, there's nothing outside the norm that we know from in English or other sung languages. So sung Russian uses 10 vowels, and they are all familiar to us. Even which a lot of people get a little touchy about. We actually use that vowel in English whenever you say the vowel e before an L sound. So if you're going to say a man's name William, you're going to shorten it. His name's Will. Or I want a glass of milk. Milk. So Russians elongate that and it turns into p, v,
Right.
It's the same vowel. And so I want to demystify this, because the barrier right now to people engaging in Russian is they can't read Cyrillic and they're afraid of how to pronounce it, because they just don't know what to do with it. I think that's easily remedied with a lyric diction training education like we get in French or German or Italian, where singers are plastic and flexible and able to learn new things. So Russian's not that big of an ask. But what's really important to me about Russian is something called its basis of articulation. Or basis of articulation is the right one. Articulatory settings is something that linguistics call. All that goes to say, our tongue is what they call a muscular hydrostat. And all that means is that it's like, you can think of it as like if you had a plastic bag full of water, right? If you take that, and the bag is not, it's not like a balloon. It's like a plastic bag full of water. So if all the water comes to this end, this part gets small. If all the water shifts up there, that part gets big, right? You follow me? So our tongue works that way. And the gross positioning of the tongue, it's the gross resting point, changes from language to language. So we look at languages from the perspective of their basis of articulation with 3 settings. You can get a retracted setting like English, where all the water in the bag sits back here, which means that most of our tongue bulk lives retracted back here, and it makes it possible for us to say t, d, because our tongue flips up and gives apical consonants. It also facilitates things like our that rhotic R sound that we get in English, or even alveolar L, right? So if we accept that English has a retracted basis of articulation, let's go to the other extreme. A fronted basis of articulation like French. You might recognize, si je te parle en français, mes lèvres sont en avant comme ça, right? Everything comes forward. And that means that now we have the bulk of our tongue up front. So when we make dental consonants, you no longer hear that air escaping, right? Because the tongue is actually sitting closer to the exit of your mouth. And French itself has a fair amount of lip rounding, right? Right? So English retracted, French or German advanced. The neutral is Russian. Russian has a neutral basis of articulation, and it actually has two versions. It has a non-palatalized basis of articulation with a really good sit, and a palatalized version where the dorsum of the tongue, the body of the tongue, sort of arches up. So if I say to you, "Молодой человек, где аптека?" all of a sudden my voice changes and you hear it drop about a fourth, right? So I think there's a tonal consequence to that, although I can't say that's true for everybody, because in linguist circles, I've talked to people and it's mixed reports. But for me, as a low male voice, I've found that my voice changes when I speak in Russian or when I sing in Russian. I don't experience a retraction. I experience a constructive neutrality that I think is an advantageous vocal tract shape to start with, right? The way bases of articulation impact the languages that they arise from is, like I said earlier, if your tongue mass is back here, maybe an apical consonant becomes normal. Or if the tongue masses up here, maybe dental consonants are normal. In Russian, they have palatalized consonants. So we've got a neutral basis of articulation, a palatalized basis of articulation. And what's interesting about that is that it actually fronts the tongue. So if I take the hump of my tongue and bring it closer to the roof of my mouth to say t, d, mi, le, instead of t, d, l, m, t, d, le, you hear that kind of shadow vowel that happens.
Right.
It's like a shadow E sound because I'm coming from an E position and peeling off the roof of my mouth while I pronounce. I think that gets your throat out of your, it gets your tongue out of your throat, the tongue bulk, which is the gola aperta that we're looking for in classical bel canto training anyway. I don't know if you saw Ken's book, just because I happen to have it here, but, oh no, it's not this one. It's
kinesthetic, yeah.
Exactly. In kinesthetic, he shows how we kind of culturally, we share a false kinesthesia where we think ah is the most open-throated vowel when it actually is E, right?
Right.
Surprise, right? And what's great about that is that because the Russian palatalized consonant inventory depends on that E shape, then it sort of walks hand in hand with that particular goal of fronting the tongue, which is so good for bel canto voice production. So that's why Russian.
The long and short of it.
The long and long of it, right?
Yeah, that's very fascinating. So I'm somebody who studied 5 languages formally. Yeah, so I'm always fascinated with linguistics and such. So I did all of my education bilingual, French and English. Went to York University. I stayed in the French residence and, did the bilingual campus thing and have a degree in classical French lit. Sorry?
Aren't you from Toronto?
I was born in Hamilton and I grew up like about a half hour south of there. But then I went to school at York, so North York, I guess.
It's amazing that you're bilingual, having been an Ontario resident from Hamilton. I don't tend to link those things. I come from New Brunswick, which is half French, half English. So it was very normal. It's part of the culture there, but that's amazing.
Well, my mother is French-Canadian. All her family's in the Sherbrooke, Quebec area. But it wasn't really so much her because she only spoke French for the first 7 years of her life until they moved to Ontario and then moved to an English-speaking area. And so she really struggled through school a lot. And then, so it wasn't really her because she met my father, who's an Anglophone, and so English was spoken in the house, but I started studying French in school, and then I started doing immersion in high school, and then I just continued through in university because it's just, languages have always just kind of been easy for me.
Oh, you're so lucky.
Yeah, and I studied, I did a couple missions trips in Mexico, and so I started picking up some Spanish, and then I studied Spanish when I got to university as well. So I took an extra year of university, let's just say that, because there's so many languages I wanted to study. I studied Hebrew in university as well. And I studied German through high school. But then I dropped German when I got to university because it was one of those things where I just couldn't see myself really using it. It wasn't very practical for me. So I figured Spanish would be more practical. French would be more practical, and then Hebrew as well. I have an affinity, so.
Great.
Yeah, so I'm always very fascinated because you were talking about sort of, and we can definitely cut this out, but you were talking about, just sort of, I recall a conversation that we had on Facebook about this really briefly, I think, about the sitting, how a language sits. It's interesting because when I speak French, I feel like my phonation frequency, my pitch drops when I speak French. And I speak just a little bit lower than I do when I speak Hebrew, which is very similar in some ways to French. It actually just goes back to my English kind of level. When I'm speaking Spanish, it's kind of there. For some reason, though, in German and French, it drops lower. And I find that's fairly typical. I don't know I wonder how much of it has to do with really the formant frequencies really, and just the perception of pitch being lower more so than it actually is the fundamental being lower, if that makes sense.
Well,
I wonder.
You're asking a really good question, and the deeper I get into linguistics, and were you able to join the group that I just started, the linguistics group? Not
yet. I will.
Okay, so no pressure, but if you're interested in this kind of stuff, you'd be a really good fit. So the vowel quadrilateral, or the vowel trapezius that we're used to seeing, was invented by Daniel Jones. He's the real life person that Henry Higgins was modeled after.
Right.
And his vowel quadrilateral shows a set of 8 primary cardinal vowels and then 10 secondary cardinal vowels, and then some other ones that sort of don't show up along his cardinal lines. And I think about those a lot because those are targets for us as singers. I think that vowel expressions really are different from language to language, but they're similar-ish enough for us to be able to hack them for singing. So if you learn a bright ah vowel, that bright ah is going to serve you for Italian, and it's going to serve you for French, and it's going to, or most French, and it's going to serve you whenever you need that. If you learn a dark ah vowel, that's going to serve you for French with circonflexe, right? And the default for the Russian ah, but they're not actually exactly the same vowels when spoken. However, when sung, lyric diction has a way of simplifying speech detail, and it's a strange. You can paint this in a few ways, but I would almost say that lyric diction sacrifices linguistic accuracy for the sake of greater resonance for singing.
Absolutely, and that's part of the reason why when singers who speak different languages sing in English, right? There's less of a perceptible accent. I can't say that there's always no accent. But there's oftentimes less of a noticeable accent.
Yes, and I love that, Karyn. That's so apropos, because I got confronted a couple of times in linguistic circles because there's the politics of linguistics are polarized against, there's descriptive use of language and prescriptive use of language. So, grammar pedants are prescriptivists. If I were going to the store, not if I was going to the store, that kind of thing, right? So that's a prescriptivist approach. And a descriptivist approach is, are you gonna go? Not, are you going to go? They actually take language for the way it's used. Now, when you take that real life polarization between the two, and you look at a very artificial construct like lyric diction, they can't accept, or at least the couple of confrontations I had, they couldn't accept that there is one baseline dialect for French lyric diction, which is un français lyonnais, right? If, like, where I grew up, I would say un an me dure la journée. But to sing it, I sing un an me dure la journée. So my un becomes un, right? That's just a conceit of French lyric diction as I understand it. Likewise, the work that I do in Russian is based off of Old Muscovite, which is a middle of the road Russian dialect. It's not Petersburg, and it's not villagey. It's Old Muscovite. And there are ways that you really ought to pronounce things if you want the maximum number of people to understand you. And like you say, if you want to jump into a production and collaborate with your colleagues, you have to kind of assimilate to what works best as a middle ground. And linguists don't yet seem to understand that on a first go. So it's been interesting to mix it up a little bit with them.
Well, I guess it's that whole, singing speech. There's a little bit of a divide there sometimes.
But what about what about si canta como si parla, right?
Yeah, but those are singers who said that, though, not linguists.
Exactly right. And I think I love that. That's exactly a great point. Yes. Yep.
All right, so we should probably officially start.
Okay, let's start.
It was good getting to know you and just finding out, because I've been fascinated with just what you're studying and how Russian came about. Actually, for a while I was working with a Russian student who was just he had the biggest voice I've ever heard on a human being. Like he's not an opera singer, but this guy could probably blow an opera singer out of the water. Like this huge voice. And he's kind of like, I would say he's more baritone. Like he's not, but he had like this crazy like extension, lower extension and upper extension. And he sings like, and like he would like, I'd have to wear like earplugs when he'd come. Yeah. Like he would do some online, and then he would come because he was he's at MIT, and he's a professor over in Russia, but then he splits his time between Russia and MIT. And so yeah, he's PhD, scientist. And yeah, he's just like so super like nerdy. It's a lot of fun. But he'll sit there at the keyboard, and he'll take over the keyboard. He'll just push me off the bench basically, and he'll just take over, and he'll be like, "Hey, see, this is what I was doing with this, and this is how I was practicing it." And he's like one of those super hyper intellectuals, which is a lot of fun for me to teach because I get it. But yeah, he would sing these songs, and he would sing everything from like Journey to like whatever, like lower stuff. And he loved Bruno Pâtier, what's that song from that musical? And it walks up like an octave and a half. There's this little walk on this, like just a few words or something that I can't think of. But he loves speaking and singing in French, so he takes French lessons. It's so funny, this guy. But his French is his favorite language to sing in. It's funny. But this guy has this enormous voice. But trying to get past the accent and trying to work through, like his accent is just so strong, and trying to work through, like his English is stellar. Like his grammar and his vocabulary, it's amazing. They're amazing. But it's like, but that accent, just trying to figure out how to get him to change those few little things that he struggles with, just those little things that say, yep, you're Russian. They just betray him.
That come out in the singing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And yet, like I said, his English is like really good in terms of vocabulary and grammar, but the accent just betrays him every time. It's so close. He's so close in parts of it, and then other parts it's like, yeah.
Oh, accents can be overcome. I had a teacher, she's une grande dame, la doyenne, who told me once that it's never a crime to speak with an accent. That's your autobiography, but we must never sing with one.
Oh, I like that. So fancy.
Well, and again, I think the linguist friends that I've been making would beg to differ with her, but at the same time, it's the industry. It's what we're operating in, so you got to go with it.
Right. So, I mean, it would be the same as, so if we go to a different country and we make an attempt to speak the language, and our grammar's not great and our accent is not wonderful, but we're trying, you know what I mean? Like we'll get the point across.
Have you been to France?
What was that?
Have you been to Paris?
Well, okay. That may be an exception, but for the most part, I think if you show an effort to say, hey, like I'm trying, and they can understand at least the basis of what you're trying to say, I think that they appreciate it. Then it's not a crime to have just like here, we have immigrants who come here and they speak with accents, and I don't think anything of it. I think as long as I can understand what you're saying, then we're good. Yeah. I don't really care about the accent as long as you get your point across. So I think, yeah, because music is an art, an elevated art, that I think that we're a little less tolerant of that. When you're speaking in a different language, you need to make sure that you don't sound like you're singing in with an accent. But I think it's that art form. But I think in everyday, situations, it's not a big deal if you don't have perfect English and you don't have you know, a perfect accent. And
like you said, it's your biography. And I think that's something, if you know, when a friend of mine, his mom is from Malta and she's been here for 40 years, but her accent is still super thick because it's her identity, you know? I tell my students though, that you can't sing with an accent just because you need to disappear into the character. And if you have a clockable accent while you're singing, that doesn't allow you to disappear effectively, unless you build it into your subtext somehow, you know. I remember the Aspen Summer Music Festival, we did Street Scene, Vile's Street Scene, and our female lead who played the mom, she had this thick Puerto Rican accent, and so she just wove it into the backstory, you know. But what's the line she sings? Not without my daughter. Like, she just, I can't even fake a Puerto Rican accent. But
yeah,
it was so it was just everything. That was like the meme quote that came away from that summer. It was hilarious. It's awesome.
so my 11-year-old, so my kids like to play Wii U, and one of the games that they like to play is the Super Smash Brothers, like the Mario Kart and stuff, right? And so Mario and Luigi have these, you know, Italian accents, and they say things like this, you know? And so he's like convinced that now that he can like say a couple things with an Italian accent, that he can just speak in any accent. I don't think he has any concept of how many accents there could possibly be out there.
Is it all in the hands?
It's all there.
That's good.
And it's a da 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 da. It's got to have that rhythmic.
But you know, Italian prosody does have that. I don't mean to come back to this stuff, but something new I learned in my doctoral studies is languages can be classified into stress-timed and syllable-timed. I don't know if this is a distinction you've run into before, so correct me if I'm telling you something you already know.
Oh, it's good. Yeah. I love talking about this stuff.
So a syllable-time language, so French is a syllable-time language. It turns out Italian is one too, which means that tous les syllabes sont égales quand on parle. Néanmoins, s'il y a un accent dans la phrase, tous les syllabes sont quand même égales, right? And that is why I think, and this is my logic leap, but that's why I think le style soutenu and that incredible legato, it comes so naturally to French because all of the syllables are equal in length, you know, in duration, if not stress. So we have syllable-timed languages and we have stress-timed languages. Now, stress-timed languages work like this. There are still rhythmic guideposts in the sentence, but sometimes you can feel the smaller rhythmic divisions between them, right? So those smaller rhythmic divisions are sort of rushed through to get to the main points again. And in those smaller rhythmic divisions, we have vowel morphing because you're not as invested in non-stressed vowel. Yeah. So we get a lot of
yeah.
And so that doesn't happen in French. In French, every vowel, even e muet, which we hear as schwa, it's a distinct It's not like we get in English or in Russian, which is also, Russian and English are both stress time. But it's why we get what's called vowel reduction. And that's why we have to teach our students to be more specific about what vowel they're singing. And, you know, in Catherine Lebouf's diction manual, where she'll advocate singing schwa as you know, behold, instead of behold, right? Like it just makes for better singing to select a vowel that's more resonant. We only do that in stress-timed languages because syllable-timed languages demand that from you anyway. You know, Italian does not have a schwa. When they have a hesitation vowel, like we would go or a French would go they go They use right? I'm sorry, I'm a nerd about this stuff. It's my
so am I though, so it's good. See, we get each other.
Nice.
Yeah, no, I don't get to talk about this stuff very often, but I'm very like fascinated with linguistics and just again languages. I mean, if I had my way, I'd be like studying more than just the languages I've studied, and I would have kept up with them, and I would have like there's so many other things I would love to study. Like
it's never too late, and you can always earmark it for after the kids are grown.
Yeah, it's it's probably more like what's going to happen. So it is too late in the sense that I just have too many things on my plate already, and there are just some things in life that I'm just going to have to accept that I'm not going to be able to do. if I have to prioritize.
You seem busy.
I have to decide what's more important.